Hi, today I'm going to talk to you about the newest free tool on my website, the 5-sided box designer, and how I used it to create this Labubu Vanity. Hi, welcome to Gray Lightning, my video blog about making things and playing games. And today I want to talk about the newest free tool on my website. You can get to my website by going to graylightmay.com, and I'll put the link to that in the description of this video. But this new tool is a 5-sided box designer. And you might be asking, why a 5-sided box? Why not a 6-sided box? And that's because while cubes have 6 sides, in our world, most boxes only have 5 sides. And that's because we use them to store things, and we need an open side for putting things in. So this is a 5-sided box. If you needed a lid for this box, the simplest thing to do would be to take the exterior dimensions of this box, put them into the designer as interior dimensions, set the height to 1 inch instead of 3 inches, which I think is what that is, and that would be the perfect lid that would fit perfectly over this box bottom. So let me talk a little bit about how you use the 5-sided box designer. You can start with either exterior or interior dimensions, and it will calculate the other set for you. And then it automatically has formulas built into it right now for the spacing of these 1/2-inch tabs. You also specify the thickness of your material, and there's a drop down that helps you do that. And then that, of course, impacts the length of these tabs and the notches they fit into. And basically, if you put in those dimensions in that, that's enough for it to generate the actual design, and it'll show you that in the preview window. And another thing that's been added to this tool, that's going to be added to all the tools in the future, is you can put in the size of either your bed or your material, and it'll monitor what you're creating in the preview window, and it'll look at the biggest piece that's there and see if it still fits within that envelope you gave it. If it starts getting close, it'll give you a warning. If it exceeds it, it'll tell you that it won't fit in the size that you specified. So I think that'll help. If you've got some flexibility on your dimensions, it'll prevent you from generating a drawing that you can't actually cut on your laser cutter. So this is called tab and notch joinery. There is a free box designer available out there right now on the internet. I've used it a couple of times, and it uses what's called finger joinery. So it's a lot of small little tabs, all the same size, that run the whole length of of each of the joins. And I've tried that, but I prefer not to use it because I like this better. I think it looks cleaner, and it's also much easier to assemble. I used the finger joinery recently on a project with very long sides, and it was absolutely miserable to assemble because you have to have glue in every one of those little finger joints. And then you have to line them all up and put them together. It's much more difficult. So this is the type of joinery I always use in my projects, and that's what my designer does. Let's talk a second about the project, because I'm going to show you, this is what I consider to be a utility tool, just like the Living Hinge is a utility tool. It's something that helps you create parts for bigger projects. And so I want to show you an example of that today, and that's using the box designer to make this Labubu Vanity. So this is my Labubu. Her name is Happiness, which is why happiness is what's engraved on the top of the vanity. And I put joy and fun as on the front of the 2 drawers. And those drawers in the case for this vanity were all generated on the box designer. So now in this case, the case is oriented with the opening to the front, because obviously that's where the drawers slide in. And the way I started out by setting the exterior dimensions of the case based on the size of the Labubu to make it, appropriately sized. And then for the drawers, I took the internal dimensions. I created a divider, and the dimensions for the divider in the middle came straight from the dimensions that I get out of the box designer. But I know that panel I've put in the middle is a 1/4 inch thick. So I subtracted a 1/4 inch from the internal width of the case and then divided that by 2, and that became the size of the drawers. So you can see how you move back and forth between internal and external dimensions, whether or not it's making a lid for a box or drawers for a cabinet. The ability to move back and forth between the two is very useful. So I'll show how I actually did this and made a few of the pieces that really dress it up. Like the top here where the happiness is engraved on, the dimensions of that come directly out of the box designer. And then you just add like a 1/4 inch to each of the 2 dimensions. It makes it a little bit larger. In my case, I mounted it to the front flush with the back because I knew I was going to be putting this mirror on it, and I wanted to be able to attach that. I also made little fronts like that. The fun and the joy are fronts on the drawers. I made little handles where the center letter is, in fact, engraved on the handle too. So those are the fun little touches that you can do after you get the basics done for you automatically by using the 5-sided box designer. So I'll show all of that in this episode. First, let's take a look at the components that are designed in the 5-sided box designer. I know the dimensions I'm shooting for to fit with the size of the Labubu. Those are exterior dimensions. I can work in millimeters or inches, but I'll stick with inches. The hardest part here is this box has to be laying on its back because the open part of the box is always to the top in the designer. So the width is 4.5 inches, but I actually have to switch the depth and the height. Just by luck, in this instance, both of those are 2 inches in the exterior dimensions, but when you look at interior, there is a difference, and it's important to keep track of what these numbers are actually referring to. The height of the cabinet is actually going to be the depth of the drawer. Then you select your material thickness. There's some options here. You can also put in your own custom numbers. And mine is 1/8 inch basswood, so I'll just go with that. Here's the material size check, or you can also use it for your bed size. I'm going to put in 12 by 12 because that's the size of the board I'm going to be using. And there's also this new SVG color guide that helps you interpret the export file. The box is laid out in the preview window the way I prefer to see it because you can see visually whether or not everything is lining up as it should. This is the full cabinet box here, and it looks right, so I'm just going to push the export button. And this downloads into your download folder. And I'm just going to go to that folder and double click on it so you can see what it looks like when it downloads, because it's not laid out there the way it is in the preview window. It's laid out in a more optimal way for cutting. And these are the 5 pieces that you need to do your project. I used the interior dimensions of that cabinet and a little bit of math to come up with the numbers I need for the drawer dimensions. And they're crazy kind of numbers. I mean, 4 decimal places, that's what happens when you're working with 1/16 of an inch. But I'll just enter those into the 3 fields here. You can see the box changing live in the preview window as you change each of these numbers. The fact that the depth and the height are very close to one another in size, but different, means that I had to be very careful working with these. I actually labeled the back of the box, as you'll see, so I could keep track of which way that box needed to be oriented. And then I just download that, and I'm going to need 2 copies of this drawer in my cut file. And once again, here's the SVG. It's just red cut lines, no fill on the drawing. I'm going to be using Illustrator to do the rest of my design. This page has everything for the main cabinet. So this is the body of the cabinet here that you saw. Here are the 2 copies of the drawers. These are the center dividers. The dimensions come from the interior dimensions of the cabinet, and I glue 2 panels together so they're a 1/4 inch thick. For the legs, this green box represents the 3/4 inch height, and I just drew one of them inside of that, and then I made 8 of those because I need 2 of those glued together for each leg. The second page of the drawing has the really fun, creative elements. The green box here is the size of the box underneath, and so I made this top panel by just extending on the 3 of the 4 sides here. And I selected the Joker font to do the happiness engraving because it's kind of artistic as well as a word. And I used the same font to put joy and fun on the front drawer panels. And here's the single letters for the knobs, and these little circles are the layer behind the letters so that they stick out a little from the front. This shows how the mirror is going to fit on the cabinet, and I found this nice little border with stars that I thought would be a good outline for the frame. This is the top layer here and a cutout for the mirror. The mirror is glued to this back layer, and it has these tabs on the bottom that will be glued to the back of the cabinet. I cut the mirror itself on my CO2 laser. I always then turn off the green references before I export the elements to the drawing. So those are all the pieces I need to cut and engrave. The 12 by 12 board fits easily into my diode laser cutter, so that's what I'll be using. This sheet that has all the main cabinet pieces takes about 9 minutes to cut, so it's a very fast project, even on the diode, which is slower than the CO2 laser. You always do your engraving before you do your cutting. That's just a good practice, and so that's what's happening here. Because of all the fill engraving, this particular sheet took about 14 minutes to cut. So now we move on to staining and assembly. I do assemble my boxes before I stain them. I'm using super glue, wood super glue, and basically what you do is you put the glue on all of the parts that extrude out the sides. So that's either the tabs or it's the 1/8 inch edge that contains the notches. I like using these granite samples to act as an additional hand in the process. So that's the main cabinet, and then I do the same thing for the 2 small drawers. This was a real test of the designer to see how it handles very small sizes, and this actually worked with this amount of tabs. This is about the smallest box I can imagine most people will be making. I used 2 different colors of Minwax wood stains, and I did natural on these pieces so the engraving would be clear. And I did that and put those aside before I ever got the other stain out. I used my favorite Jacobian color wood stain for the dark colors, and I did the back of the mirror, and I did the drawers, but I did not paint over the B I had written on the back of the drawers so that I would not confuse the orientation of that. And then the little legs are dark, as are the body of the main cabinet. I left these to dry overnight. Final assembly is gluing on the little knobs, gluing together the mirror, gluing the fronts on the drawers, and this is tricky because they're only a little bit bigger, so you have to really position them carefully, and super glue dries fast. For the top, I actually lay it out, draw a line, and then glue it into that rectangle. And finally, I glue on the mirror. And that's it. It's all finished. The little drawers slide in and out nicely. That center panel really helps keep them aligned. I think this shows how the 5-box designer and a little imagination can really give you a cute little project. You might have a little girl in your life who would really love this project, and my next one, which is also for Labubu. I have a lot of new designer tools in mind. If you're interested, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you know when I post a new one.